In the summer of 1867, in a small farming town outside Sedalia, Missouri, 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell became the focus of the most disturbing medical case study ever recorded in the Midwest. Dr. Samuel Harding, the only doctor in the area, wrote down his thoughts about a child whose behavior went against everything 19th century medicine knew about human nature in 3 leather-bound journals. People who only saw the boy thought he was normal, even charming, but there was something about him that medical science at the time couldn't explain. 3 people died in accidents near Timothy Caldwell over the course of 6 months, and dozens of farm animals were found dead under strange circumstances. 11 people had all, in some way, met a child whose smile never reached his pale blue eyes. Local officials sealed and hid the official records for more than 100 years, but the truth about Timothy Caldwell shows a darkness that makes us question everything we thought we knew about how evil children can be. If you're interested in the story of Timothy Caldwell and the fear that gripped Sedalia County, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. Please leave a comment telling us what state or city you're listening from. We love hearing from mystery fans all over the world. Timothy Caldwell would become famous for things that didn't start with violence but with loss. The Missouri of 1867 was a state that was still hurting from the wounds of the Civil War. Towns like Sedalia had sent their young men to fight and die on faraway battlefields. This left behind widows, orphans, and communities that were having a hard time rebuilding. The Caldwell farm, which was in a valley 15 miles south of town, used to do well. James and Martha Caldwell built their home with the hopes of raising cows and corn, but those hopes died with James at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Martha tried to run the farm by herself, but in the bitter winter of 1865, consumption took her lungs. Their son Thomas, who was only 21, got land he couldn't work and debts he couldn't pay. When Thomas found out that his brother William had died in Andersonville prison, leaving behind a widow and an 8-year-old son, he saw both a burden and an opportunity. Timothy, the boy, would need a place to live, and Thomas needed help with the never-ending work of farming. Thomas Caldwell was a tough guy, and the war and loss made him even tougher. During the years they didn't have any kids, his wife Sarah became bitter and sharp-tongued. Neither of them was very good at raising a child, especially one who showed up at their door in the spring of 1866 with nothing but a small cloth bag and eyes that looked way too old for his young face. Timothy Caldwell was small for his age. His skin was pale and burned easily in the Missouri sun. His Aunt Sarah kept his hair short to keep lice away. He didn't talk much about his life before the farm, and when he did, he only gave bits and pieces. His father had been a soldier, his mother had coughed up blood, and he had lived with neighbors for a while after she died. Adults were most impressed by how polite Timothy was. He always said, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am." He never complained about punishment or work. He looked like the perfect example of a well-behaved child in every way. Timothy first met Dr. Samuel Harding in June 1866, when the boy went to town with his uncle to get supplies. Harding, who graduated from the Missouri Medical College and was one of the few trained doctors west of St. Louis, had learned to read people very well while treating both Union and Confederate soldiers. There was something about the Caldwell boy that made him uneasy, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Harding would later write in his journal, "The child was very polite." He answered questions directly, kept eye contact, and didn't fidget or act shy like most rural kids do when they meet someone new. But I felt very uncomfortable around him. His gaze was so intense that it seemed like he was studying me with the same clinical interest that I usually reserve for my patients. The farming community around Sedalia was small enough that everyone knew what was going on with everyone else. The Caldwell farm was alone, but not so alone that people who lived nearby didn't notice things. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, who lived next to the Caldwell land, often saw Timothy working in the fields or taking care of the animals. She told her husband that the boy worked with an unusual amount of focus for a child his age. He never seemed to get tired and never stopped to play or rest, as children do. She told her husband, Samuel, over dinner one night, "It was like watching a little machine. He worked hard all day, from sunrise to sunset, without complaining or slowing down. It's not normal for a boy to not want to play." Eleanor saw that her chickens got upset whenever Timothy was near the Patterson farm's property line. They would gather in groups, squawking and fluffing their feathers, and not getting close to the fence that separated the two properties. Eleanor's husband said it was just a coincidence, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the animals knew something about the boy that people didn't. On a hot August afternoon in 1866, the first person died. Mary Fletcher, the blacksmith's daughter, was 5 years old and well known in the town for her bright laugh and tendency to wander. She had been playing near Willow Creek, a shallow stream that ran through several properties, including the Caldwell farm. Timothy discovered her body. He got to the Fletcher house just as the family was getting ready for dinner. His clothes were wet, and his face was pale, as if he was really upset. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, his voice steady even though he was clearly upset, "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." The group that went looking for Mary Fletcher found her face down in water that was only 18 inches deep. Dr. Harding was called right away and found that the child had drowned. This is a sad but common accident in rural areas where kids play near water without adult supervision. Harding wasn't worried about the death itself. He was worried about Timothy's story of finding the body. The boy gave an unusually detailed account of where Mary had been found, how her body was positioned, and how her clothes were. When asked how he ended up in that exact place at that exact time, Timothy said he was looking for a calf that had gotten lost. Harding wrote in his journal, the boy's memory was very clear. He could tell you exactly where the dead child's arms and legs were, how her dress had gotten caught on a branch under the water, and even what color the water was around her face. This level of detail seemed strange for a child who said they were scared and upset by what they had found. When asked, Thomas Caldwell said that one of their calves had gone missing that morning, and that he had sent Timothy to look for it in the creek area. 2 days later, they found the calf healthy and grazing in a meadow almost a mile from where Mary Fletcher had drowned. The Fletcher family was heartbroken over their loss, and they were grateful for Timothy's sympathy. He was the one who found their daughter and told them right away, after all. Timothy sat quietly with his aunt and uncle at the funeral, keeping his head down the whole time. He accepted their thanks with the right amount of seriousness when they thanked him for acting quickly to let them know. He told Mary's father, "I wish I could have found her sooner." His voice was just the right mix of regret and sadness. But Eleanor Patterson, who was watching from across the church, saw something that bothered her for days after. Timothy Caldwell's face never changed when Mary Fletcher's mother collapsed in grief during the service, or when grown men cried at the sight of the small coffin. He seemed sad as he bowed his head, but when he thought no one was watching, his pale blue eyes stayed dry and alert, taking in everything that was happening around him. 3 weeks later, the second death happened. Henrik Larsson, an old Norwegian immigrant who had worked as a logger before arthritis forced him to retire, was found at the bottom of a rocky outcrop that locals call Devil's Bluff. Henrik was known to climb the bluff often to check on the wild beehives he kept. It was a good place to see the creek where Mary Fletcher had drowned. Timothy Caldwell was once again involved in the discovery. He was walking home from town when he saw something strange at the bottom of the bluff. Timothy told the people who were gathering, "I saw Mr. Larsson's hat get stuck in a thorn bush. I yelled at him, but he didn't answer, so I went down to look." Henrik Larson was dead, and it looked like he had fallen from the top of the 40-foot bluff and broken his neck. Dr. Harding's examination showed that the old man probably died right away when he hit the ground. The only strange thing about the scene was that there were a lot of dead bees all over the body, which is not something you would normally find away from a hive. Mr. Larson knew those bluffs better than any man in the county, Samuel Patterson told Dr. Harding after the test. He'd been climbing up there for 3 years and never tripped. It doesn't make sense that he'd fall now. Timothy said that maybe the old man had been stung by bees and lost his balance when asked. The boy said, "He always told me how mad they get when you bother them." Maybe they surrounded him and he got confused. Dr. Harding thought Timothy's explanation made sense, but there was something about the scene that bothered him. There were a lot of dead bees all around Henrik's body. There should have been more signs of bee activity along the old man's assumed path of flight and fall if he had disturbed a hive at the top of the bluff. Instead, it looked like the bees had somehow gathered around the site of the impact. Harding went to the top of the bluff to look at the beehives. They were still there and didn't look like they had been disturbed recently. The worker bees were busy, but not upset, as they went about their normal business of collecting nectar from the wildflowers that bloom in late summer. The third death made it clear that there was no chance. Jacob Mills, who was 6 years old, went missing in September 1866 while playing in the woods near his family's cabin. 4 days later, his body was found in an empty well that was almost half a mile from where he had last been seen. Timothy Caldwell had signed up to help look for the missing person. Timothy searched with the adult volunteers for 3 days, which is very impressive for a child his age. He seemed to know the woods very well, leading searchers through places that even people who had lived there for a long time found hard to get to. Timothy said that he had learned the area so well by spending his free time exploring the woods in search of useful plants and herbs that his aunt could use for cooking and medicine. Timothy showed up at the Mills cabin on the 4th day, just after dawn. "I think I found something," he said to Jacob's dad, his voice heavy with tiredness. "There's an old well about half a mile north of here. I heard what sounded like crying." Fallen logs and overgrown brush partially hid the well. Jacob Mills was at the bottom, alive but barely aware, and suffering from dehydration and exposure. They called Dr. Harding right away, but the boy died a few hours after being pulled from the well. His small body couldn't handle the stress. Harding wrote in his journal, the child had been at the bottom of that well for almost 4 days. The fact that Timothy Caldwell was able to find him in such a hard-to-find place raises troubling questions. How well does the boy know the area? What other hidden dangers might he know about? Timothy's actions during Jacob's last hours were even more troubling. Timothy sat quietly in the corner of the cabin, apparently praying, while the Mills family kept watch over their dying son. But Dr. Harding, who was in a place where he could see the boy without being seen, saw something that really upset him. Timothy wasn't praying. His lips were moving, but his eyes were locked on Jacob Mills with an intensity that seemed almost scientific. He seemed to be writing down every little thing about the dying child's condition, like how hard it was for him to breathe, how pale his skin was, and how his consciousness came and went. Timothy's face showed no sadness or shock when Jacob finally died. Harding could only describe what he felt as satisfaction. Dr. Harding made an excuse to go to the empty well where Jacob had been found after the funeral. There were things about the site that bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on them. The well was well hidden, though, by natural debris that would have taken a lot of work to move. Timothy, on the other hand, said he heard crying from this spot, which didn't seem likely because of how deep the well was and how much brush was covering it. Harding saw something that the first rescue team had missed because they were in such a hurry to save Jacob Mills. The trash around the edge of the well was arranged in a way that was very precise. Logs and branches that should have fallen randomly showed signs of being put there on purpose, making a natural-looking camouflage that would be almost impossible to see unless you knew exactly where to look. Harding couldn't say what the implications were out loud because they were too scary, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Jacob Mills hadn't just fallen into the well. Someone had put him there and carefully hidden the place until the boy was too weak to be saved. Harding started writing down a lot of information about Timothy Caldwell that night. Harding didn't have any proof, though, and suspicions weren't proof. If his suspicions were true, the boy was a threat to the whole community. The problem was that Timothy Caldwell looked like a perfect child. He went to church with his aunt and uncle every week. During services, he sat quietly and said prayers with the right amount of respect. He worked hard on the farm and did jobs that would be hard for many adults to do. He talked to his elders with respect and showed proper respect to people in charge. Most importantly, Timothy had good reasons for being at each of the tragedies. He found Mary Fletcher while looking for a lost calf. He was on his way home from town when he saw Henrik Larsson's hat. He had offered to help look for Jacob Mills, just like any other concerned member of the community would have. But Harding's medical training had taught him to look beyond what he saw on the outside. He had learned to spot the signs of men who killed not out of duty to their country or out of desperation, but out of something darker and more basic while treating wounded soldiers. These men were cold and disconnected from normal human emotion. This showed in small ways, like not reacting enough to horror, being too interested in suffering, and being able to talk about violence without getting upset. Timothy Caldwell had all of these traits, but they were all in the body and face of an 8-year-old child. In October 1866, Dr. Harding's investigation really got going. As the community's doctor, he made regular visits to farms and homes in the area, supposedly to check on the health of families who were still recovering from the hardships of war. In fact, he was getting information about Timothy Caldwell. What he found was a disturbing picture of a child who seemed to be at the center of a circle of bad luck that was getting bigger and bigger. It wasn't disease that was killing livestock on nearby farms. It was what looked like accidental injuries. Chickens were found with broken necks, and it looked like foxes had killed them without leaving any other signs of predation. Pigs got strange wounds that got infected and killed them. Horses suddenly became lame, which made farmers have to put them down. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson told Dr. Harding that she had lost 17 chickens in the last 2 months. "It's the weirdest thing," she said. "They're dying 1 or 2 at a time, and they're always found in the morning with their necks broken. My husband thinks it's foxes, but I've never seen any signs of foxes around the coop, and the way they're killed is too neat, too." Harding found evidence that backed up Eleanor's suspicions when he looked at the most recent deaths. The chickens were killed by applying the right amount of force to certain points on their necks, which required a lot of knowledge of anatomy. It wasn't the random violence that happens in predator attacks. It was something much more planned and controlled. Other farms showed similar patterns. James Wickham had lost 3 calves to what he called freak accidents. These were animals that had somehow strangled themselves on ropes or gotten their heads stuck in fence rails in ways that didn't make sense. Robert Dunham's prize bull, which was one of the most sure-footed animals in the county, had fallen into a ditch and broken its leg. In every case, the farms that were affected were close enough to Caldwell's property that people could walk there. In some cases, neighbors even said they saw Timothy nearby at the time of the incident. James Wickham told Dr. Harding, "I saw him walking along our fence line the morning before we found the calf. I thought it was strange that he was so far from home, but every time I saw him, he was polite and waved and said hello like he was taught." During his regular medical visits to the Caldwell farm, Dr. Harding also started to pay more attention to how Timothy acted. The boy was always there for these visits, standing quietly while Dr. Harding looked at his aunt and uncle for the different problems that come up in farming life. Harding did, however, notice that Timothy was very interested in these exams. He asked questions about anatomy and medical procedures that seemed too advanced for a child his age. Timothy asked during one visit, "How do you know if someone's really dead?" in a casual tone, as if he were talking about the weather. "Sometimes people just look like they're asleep." Timothy said he was worried about being able to help if someone got hurt while he was alone on the farm. When asked why, he was curious. He said, "Uncle Thomas says I need to know how to deal with emergencies because we're so far from town." The answer made sense, but Dr. Harding didn't like something about the question. Timothy's interest in death and injury had a clinical quality that went beyond what most kids are curious about. The boy asked about how dying worked, how long it took, what signs to look for, and whether people could live through different kinds of trauma. He was as interested as a medical student studying dead bodies. Harding started testing Timothy's knowledge by giving him false information on purpose. For example, he said that some injuries were fatal when they weren't, or that certain symptoms meant certain conditions. Timothy never directly questioned these false claims, but Harding saw that the boy remembered everything he heard very well. Timothy's reaction to Dr. Harding's stories about treating wounded soldiers during the war was even more disturbing. Most kids reacted with shock or sadness when they heard about injuries on the battlefield, but Timothy listened closely and asked detailed questions about how the wounds were shaped, how much blood was lost, and how many people survived. "Did they scream a lot when you cut off their arms?" Timothy asked during one of these talks, his pale blue eyes fixed on Dr. Harding's face. "Or were they too hurt to make noise?" Timothy asked in his usual polite way. This question sent a chill down Dr. Harding's spine that he would never forget. Dr. Harding had written down almost everything he had seen about Timothy Caldwell in 2 full journals by November 1866. The picture that came out was of a child who understood violence and death like an adult but had no empathy for other people. Documentation was not the same as proof, and proof was what Harding needed if he wanted to keep the community safe from what he was becoming more and more sure was a dangerous predator. Thomas Caldwell hurt his back during the fall harvest, which gave them the chance to gather that evidence. Because of the injury, the person had to stay in bed and see the doctor every day. This gave Dr. Harding more access to the Caldwell home than ever before. During these visits, he started talking to Timothy for longer periods of time, carefully asking questions to find out how much the boy knew and what he was thinking. What he found was worse than what he had feared the most. Timothy Caldwell had been doing experiments on living things for months, maybe even years. Dr. Harding found out that the boy had been systematically capturing and torturing small animals, studying how they reacted to different types of injury and distress by asking him questions and watching him closely. Timothy had talked about the cave in one of their talks, saying it was a place where he could think and be by himself. Dr. Harding found a well-organized collection of animal bones, crude surgical tools made from farm tools, and a set of detailed drawings that showed different experiments in torture and mutilation when he looked into the site. The drawings were the most upsetting thing they found. They showed rabbits, squirrels, birds, and bigger animals in different stages of being cut up and hurt, and they were surprisingly well done for a child. Timothy's careful handwriting accompanied each drawing with notes about the animal's reactions, how long it took to die, and which methods caused the most pain. One note next to a detailed drawing of a rabbit said, "Subject remained conscious for about 10 minutes after removal of eyes. Vocalizations slowly got quieter. Movement stopped when pressure was put on the throat." Dr. Harding figured out that Timothy had been using the animals in the community as subjects for experiments in cruelty that were getting more and more complicated. Timothy wanted to test his methods on bigger subjects, which is why the deaths on nearby farms were not planned. But the most terrifying thing they found was a new set of drawings that showed people instead of animals. The sketches showed kids and adults in different poses of pain and distress, along with notes that speculated on how the body works and how people might hurt each other. One picture clearly showed Mary Fletcher, the first child to die. Another showed Henrik Larsson. A third picture showed Jacob Mills at the bottom of a well, with detailed notes about how dehydration and exposure affect the human body. Timothy Caldwell didn't just happen to be there when these people died. He planned their deaths, carried them out with careful precision, and wrote down what happened so that it could be studied later. Dr. Harding would soon find out that the horror in Sedalia County was far from over. If this story is giving you the creeps, send this video to a friend who likes dark mysteries. Hit the like button to show your support, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Let's find out what happens next together. Dr. Harding was in a situation that was impossible. The evidence in the cave showed that Timothy Caldwell was responsible for several deaths, but that evidence had been gotten through what was basically an illegal search. Also, the idea that an 8-year-old child could be a calculating murderer was so far outside the norm for how people act that no court would believe it. In 1867, doctors didn't know how to explain antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. People thought that kids were naturally innocent and that bad things or traumatic events were the only things that could make them bad. Most people couldn't even imagine the idea that a child could be born without the ability to empathize or think morally. Dr. Harding knew that if he told the local authorities what he had found, they would probably think he was crazy because he had been treating war casualties for too long. There would be excuses for the evidence. Timothy would be defended as a traumatized orphan acting out his grief, and the killings would go on. Instead, Dr. Harding chose to talk to Timothy directly. The next time he went to the Caldwell farm, he asked the boy to walk with him to check on the animals in the far pasture. Dr. Harding told them what he had found in the cave after they were alone. Dr. Harding didn't expect Timothy to react this way. The boy didn't seem surprised, didn't deny it, and wasn't afraid of being caught. Instead, he calmly listened as Dr. Harding talked about the drawings and notes, nodding every now and then as if to confirm that the doctor's observations were correct. Timothy said, "You're not going to tell anyone," after Dr. Harding was done talking. It was not a question or a plea, but a statement of fact that was made with complete confidence. "Why wouldn't I?" Dr. Harding asked, really wanting to know why the boy thought that. Timothy smiled, which was the first real sign of emotion that Dr. Harding had ever seen on his face. "Because no one would believe you," he said. "And because you want to know what I'll do next." The boy was right in both cases. Dr. Harding knew that what he was saying would sound like the rantings of a crazy person, but Timothy had also found something that the doctor didn't want to admit even to himself. A scientific interest in watching the growth of what might be the most dangerous person he had ever met. Dr. Harding asked, "How long have you been doing this?" Timothy said, "Since I was 5, maybe even earlier. I started with insects, then mice, then bigger things. It's interesting to see how different animals react to the same treatments." "And what about the people who died?" Timothy shrugged his shoulders. "They were also experiments. I wanted to see if people would act the same way as animals. They do mostly. But they are better at understanding what's going on with them. That makes it more interesting." There was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather in November. "What are you going to do next?" Timothy thought about the question carefully before answering. "I need to know what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely, someone who wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late." It was clear that Timothy was going to kill his aunt and uncle. Dr. Harding knew that Timothy could act on his plans in a few days or even hours. The boy had told Timothy what he was going to do with the casual confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. Based on what Timothy had done in the past, it was likely that he would not hesitate once he had made up his mind. Later that night, Dr. Harding went to see Sheriff William Crawford in Sedalia. Crawford was a practical man who had done well in the Union Army and didn't like theories or speculation. However, he trusted Dr. Harding's judgment and was willing to listen to evidence no matter how strange the situation was. Dr. Harding made his case carefully, using facts that could be checked instead of psychological theories. He showed Crawford the cave drawings and notes, pointed out the pattern of deaths and accidents that had happened around Timothy, and wrote down how strange it was that the boy knew so much about anatomy and violence. Most importantly, Dr. Harding told Timothy that he wanted to kill his aunt and uncle. No matter where it came from, this was information that couldn't be ignored. Sheriff Crawford said after looking at the evidence and becoming more and more alarmed by each disturbing drawing, "Even if half of what you're telling me is true, we can't arrest a child for drawings and suspicions, but we can watch him, and we can be ready to act if he tries anything." Crawford studied Timothy's drawings with great detail, noting things that even his experience as a Civil War veteran hadn't prepared him for. The two men spent hours working on their plan, bringing in Crawford's most trusted deputies, who had worked for him during the war and could be counted on to stay calm under pressure. Sheriff Crawford and Dr. Harding came up with a full plan. Dr. Harding would come to the Caldwell farm at his usual time and bring laudanum, which he said was for Thomas's pain management, but was really to keep both Thomas and Sarah sedated enough so that Timothy couldn't easily hurt them. Sheriff Crawford and his deputies would set up in strategic places around the farm property so they could respond quickly but not be seen. The next morning, the plan was put into action. Dr. Harding saw right away that something was different as he drove his buggy up to the farmhouse. There were no sounds of farm work going on in the morning, like chickens pecking in the yard or pigs grunting in their pen. The property was eerily quiet, which made his skin crawl. Timothy was already in the doorway when Dr. Harding got out of his buggy. The boy stood still, his pale blue eyes following the doctor's every move with a predatory look. Dr. Harding saw that Timothy's sleeves were rolled up past his elbows and that his hands looked like they had just been scrubbed. This kind of thorough cleaning made it look like he was getting ready for messy work. Timothy said, "Good morning, Dr. Harding," in his usual polite tone, but something had changed beneath the surface. There was an excitement there that the boy was having trouble holding back. "I've been waiting for you." Dr. Harding felt a chill run through him when he read the words. Timothy's use of the word waiting made it seem like he had been looking forward to this visit, and maybe even counting on it as part of whatever plan he had made. Dr. Harding found Thomas and Sarah Caldwell in their bedroom when he got inside. They both looked like they were sleeping soundly. But when he got closer to Thomas's bed to check on him, he saw that the man's breathing was shallow and his skin had turned gray, which made it look like he was more than just sleeping. "What did you give them?" Dr. Harding asked softly. He didn't turn to look at Timothy, but he knew the boy was watching him closely. Timothy said, "Just some herbs I found in the woods." His tone was innocent, but his choice of words was deliberate. "There are a lot of cool plants growing wild around here. Some of them are very useful." Dr. Harding checked Thomas's pulse and found that it was weak but steady. Sarah had similar symptoms. She was deeply unconscious but still alive. Timothy had been careful about how much of whatever he had used. The boy wanted his victims to be alive but helpless, at least for now. Timothy went on to say, "They won't wake up for a few hours. That should give us enough time to talk without being interrupted." Dr. Harding had never had a conversation like the one that followed. Timothy talked about murder and torture like a medical professor would talk about anatomy. He talked about his tests on animals and people in a very scientific way, going into detail about how he did them and what he learned from each death. Mary Fletcher taught me that drowning is actually quite slow, Timothy said as he sat down in a chair, as if he were starting a nice afternoon chat. People think that people just slip under the water and disappear, but that's not how it works at all. There's panic and struggling, and this interesting pattern of breathing attempts before the person finally gives up. I had to hold her down for almost 3 minutes before she stopped fighting. Dr. Harding's blood froze. You kept her under the water? Timothy nodded with excitement. I told her I had found a pretty stone at the bottom of the creek while she was playing there. When she bent over to look, I just pushed her head down and held it there. She was so small that it didn't take much strength, but she fought harder than I thought she would. That's when I realized that people have much stronger survival instincts than animals. And what about Henrik Larson? Timothy said. That was harder. I couldn't beat him up, so I had to think outside the box. I knew he checked his beehives every Thursday morning, so the night before I went up to the bluff and loosened some of the stones along the edge. Then I took bees from one of his hives and put them in a cloth bag. Timothy's eyes sparkled as he talked about how he did it. When Mr. Larson climbed up to check the hives, I was hiding behind some rocks. I threw the bag of bees at his face and yelled that a huge swarm was attacking him. He panicked and fell back over the edge of the stone barrier, which I had weakened. The fall killed him right away, just like I planned. What about Jacob Mills? Timothy said. Jacob was the most interesting of all. His voice sounded like a teacher telling a very interesting story. I didn't kill him quickly like the others. I wanted to see what would happen if someone died slowly over several days. So I told him I had found a family of baby raccoons and convinced him to follow me into the woods. Timothy paused, as if he were enjoying the memory. Jacob was so worried about the fake baby animals that he didn't think about the danger. I helped him climb down into the well. Then I moved the logs and brush to cover the opening. I brought him just enough water every day for 4 days to keep him alive, but not enough to let him get his strength back. Dr. Harding knew that Timothy was no longer just talking about experiments that might happen in the future. The boy had specific plans, and it was clear that the people who were already in the house were part of those plans. Dr. Harding asked directly, "What are you going to do with your aunt and uncle?" Timothy's real smile came back, and it was bigger than Dr. Harding had ever seen it. "That's where you come in, Dr. Harding. All of my previous experiments have been with people who didn't know what was going to happen to them until it was too late. But you're different. You know exactly what I am and what I can do. That makes you the perfect subject for a completely new type of study." Timothy started to move around the room as he talked, picking up things that Dr. Harding thought could be used as weapons: rope from the barn, a heavy candlestick from the mantelpiece, and a few sharp kitchen tools. The boy carefully put his tools in order, as if he were getting ready for surgery. Timothy's excitement grew as he said, "I want to find out what happens when someone who knows they're going to die tries to save people they care about. Will you give up your life to save Uncle Thomas and Aunt Sarah? Will you try to fight me, even though you know I've planned for that? Will you try to run away and leave them behind to save yourself?" Dr. Harding knew it was too late to talk. Timothy had told everyone in the house enough about his plans to make it clear that they were all in immediate danger of death. He took the gun out of his medical bag and aimed it at the boy. "Step away from the knives, Timothy," Dr. Harding said, his heart racing but his voice steady. Timothy was more interested in the gun than scared of it. "That's a Navy Colt, right?" he asked in a friendly way. "I've seen pictures of them in books about the war. How many bullets can they hold?" "6, Dr. Harding said without thinking, and then he wished he hadn't given the answer right away. Timothy asked, "And how many people are you trying to keep safe? There's Uncle Thomas, Aunt Sarah, you, and probably the 3 police officers outside. That's 6 people, if I'm counting right. So, even if you shoot me, you'll have run out of bullets." Timothy got closer and didn't care about staying out of range of the gun anymore. "You want to know how I got to be who I am," he said, his voice sounding almost hypnotic. "You want to know if I was born this way, or if something made me this way. You want to know if there are other people like me, and how to spot them before they start killing." All of the statements were true, and Timothy's ability to recognize and take advantage of Dr. Harding's intellectual curiosity was just as scary as his ability to be violent. The boy knew people well enough to guess how they would act and change how they reacted, even when they knew he was doing it. Timothy's confrontation happened when he walked up to his uncle, who was sleeping, with a long piece of rope in his hands. Dr. Harding stepped in to help, but Timothy moved quickly and with surprising strength, pulling out a kitchen knife and cutting the doctor's arm. The fight that followed was short but very violent. Timothy fought like a cornered animal, using the knife with skill that showed he had practiced a lot. The boy was shorter and weaker than Dr. Harding, but he was also faster and more agile. He fought with the precise accuracy of someone who had studied anatomy a lot. Dr. Harding was able to grab Timothy's wrist and twist it until the boy dropped the knife. But Timothy quickly pulled out another blade from his clothes. It was clear that the boy had made several weapons and put them in the right places around the house. Sheriff Crawford and his deputies ran from their hiding places when they heard the fight. They kicked down the back door and saw Dr. Harding fighting with Timothy. Thomas and Sarah Caldwell were lying unconscious on their bed, apparently unaware of the violence happening around them. Deputy Mitchell quickly put Timothy down, and Dr. Harding took a break to check on the couple who were still unconscious. Timothy Caldwell sat quietly in the corner of the room when the dust settled. His clothes were torn and his face was bloody, but his pale blue eyes still had the same cold intelligence that had upset Dr. Harding so many months before. Timothy said, "You can't prove anything," as the deputies tied him up with ropes. "Nobody will believe that a kid did all of that." Sheriff Crawford looked at the boy with both disgust and interest. "Maybe not," he said. "But we don't have to prove everything. No matter how old you are, trying to kill your family is enough to get you locked up." Timothy smiled at that, just like he had the day before when Dr. Harding saw him. "You won't hang me," he said with complete confidence. "I'm too young and interesting for someone to want to study me instead." The horror in Sedalia County gets worse just when we thought we had seen it all. If this story scares you, send this video to a friend who likes dark mysteries. Hit the like button to show your support for our content. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's find out what happens next together. Timothy Caldwell was wrong about what would happen to him, but he was right that it would be hard to prove his crimes. Sheriff Crawford ran into the same problems that Dr. Harding had predicted when he tried to show the evidence from the cave to the county prosecutors. People said that the drawings and notes were just the work of a troubled child acting out because of the deaths of his parents. People said that the pattern of accidents and deaths was just a coincidence, made worse by Timothy's bad habit of being helpful during emergencies. But there was no way to explain away the attempted murder of Thomas and Sarah Caldwell. 3 police officers saw Timothy attack his sleeping family members with the clear intent to kill them. There is no way that even the most understanding people could say that an 8-year-old boy would attack family members with a knife unless there was something seriously wrong with him. In 1867, the law did not have a way to deal with violent kids. Timothy was too young to be charged as an adult, but he was also too dangerous to just be put in an orphanage or reformatory. The case posed unprecedented problems for Missouri's justice system, drawing the attention of legal and medical experts from all over the region. After weeks of fighting in court and talking to experts from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia, a deal was finally made. Timothy would be sent to the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton, where the best alienists in the area would study and treat him. No one was completely happy with the decision. Prosecutors wanted Timothy to be tried as an adult for murder, but defense lawyers said that a child so young couldn't be held responsible for what he did. Some doctors thought Timothy could be helped, while others thought he was too dangerous to be helped. Dr. Samuel Harding offered to go to the hospital with Timothy and stayed there for 3 months, keeping track of the boy's behavior and working with the hospital staff to figure out what was going on. The case study that came out of it was one of the first systematic studies of antisocial behavior in kids, but it wouldn't be published until years later. Timothy adjusted to life in the hospital with the same smartness he had shown on the farm. He quickly learned how to fake the right feelings and reactions, which led some staff members to believe that he was making great progress in getting over his traumatic episodes. Timothy would cry when talking about his crimes, say he was sorry in a way that seemed real, and show what looked like real gratitude for the care he was getting. Dr. Harding, on the other hand, said that Timothy was just watching the people around him to learn how to control them better. The boy had made a full list of all the different ways people show their emotions, and he could perfectly copy these signals even though he didn't feel any of the emotions himself. Dr. Harding wrote in his detailed reports that the subject shows amazing cognitive abilities but has no real emotional response. He has learned to fake normal human reactions well enough to fool casual observers, but if you watch him for a long time, you can tell that he is not really doing them. Timothy understands happiness as the face people make when they want something good to continue, and sadness as the face people make when they want others to help them. But he has never actually felt either emotion himself. Dr. Harding's assessment also disclosed the magnitude of Timothy's violent fantasies and prospective intentions. Timothy started sharing ideas for future experiments that made his past crimes seem almost restrained by comparison, when the boy thought he had gained Dr. Harding's trust by pretending to be interested in the scientific way of studying human behavior. Dr. Harding said in a private report, "He has come up with complicated ways to test how people react to different kinds of mental and physical torture. His plans show a lot of creativity and attention to detail, as well as a deep understanding of how people think. If he were allowed to grow up and get more resources, he would probably become one of the most dangerous people in American history." The hospital records show that Timothy stayed there for 1.5 years. During that time, a number of strange things happened that looked like Timothy's methods. Other patients were found dead in ways that looked like accidents or natural causes, but when looked at closely, they showed signs of being planned. 3 elderly patients died from what looked like heart failure after spending time with Timothy, even though they had all been in good health before. 2 younger patients fell and hurt themselves badly, but both falls happened in places where Timothy had been seen earlier in the day. The most disturbing reports were from patients who said Timothy had been coming to see them at night and standing silently by their beds, watching them sleep. People who worked closely with Timothy at the hospital also started having strange problems. Several nurses said they had nightmares that kept coming back after spending time with the boy. These dreams often included graphic scenes of violence and death. 2 attendants asked to be moved to other wards because they said they felt like they were always being watched, even though Timothy was supposed to be in his room. Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, who had been called in to help Timothy with his treatment, found out that the boy had been keeping a secret journal. Timothy persuaded a nurse to give him paper and a pencil for therapeutic writing exercises. He said that writing down his thoughts and feelings would help him deal with his emotions better. The journal seemed to have everything Timothy said it would have: daily entries about his thoughts, his regrets about things he had done in the past, and his hopes for getting better in the future. The writing was appropriate for children in terms of language and feelings. It showed a young person who was very troubled but could be saved, and who was trying to get over traumatic events. Dr. Fitzgerald, on the other hand, was trained in European psychiatric methods that included knowing about coded communication systems. When she used analytical methods on Timothy's journal, she found that the entries that looked innocent actually had a very complicated code system. The decoded messages showed Timothy's real thoughts and plans in a very disturbing way. Instead of feeling sorry or going through rehab, he was doing a thorough study of the hospital, its staff, and its security measures. He didn't just want to get out, he wanted to use his time in prison to learn more advanced ways to kill and manipulate people. Day 47. Dr. F thinks my tears during today's session were real, read one decoded entry. Her response pattern shows that she is more sympathetic and less suspicious. It will likely take 3 more weeks of consistent performance to build enough trust for physical contact during sessions. Finding Timothy's coded journal made security procedures stricter right away and cut down on his contact with hospital staff. But Timothy was able to adapt to these changes with his usual flexibility. He changed his focus from manipulation to gathering information about hospital routines and possible escape routes. Timothy Caldwell went missing from the Missouri State Hospital in the summer of 1868, and the reasons for his disappearance were never fully explained. The official investigation found that he had somehow gotten away during a transfer between buildings, even though he was being watched by several guards at all times. Dr. Harding thought that Timothy's escape was much more complicated than what the official report said. While he was locked up, the boy showed amazing patience and planning skills. It seemed likely that he had been getting ready to leave for months. After Timothy went missing, evidence showed that he had been manipulating the staff at the facility much better than anyone had thought. Several guards said that in the weeks leading up to Timothy's escape, they made small changes to the rules for him, like letting him exercise for longer periods of time, giving him more reading material, and making small changes to his daily routine that didn't seem harmful on their own, but may have given him chances to escape. In his last report on the case, Dr. Harding wrote, "He spent 1.5 years studying that facility and its staff. By the time he made his move, he knew more about the psychology of everyone who worked there than they did. His escape wasn't an act of desperation. It was the result of a carefully thought-out plan." Dr. Harding started getting reports of strange deaths and accidents in the Midwest in the months and years after Timothy went missing. Many of these events had signs that were consistent with Timothy's methods, such as carefully planned accidents that led to death, signs of systematic animal torture, and the presence of a child who seemed unusually helpful and emotionally mature. The problem was that Timothy would be older now, and he might be strong enough to overpower adults, and smart enough to avoid making the same mistakes that got him caught the first time. His years of intense study of human psychology, along with his natural intelligence and complete lack of moral restraint, had created something never seen before in American criminal history. Dr. Harding spent the last years of his career following these reports and trying to figure out what Timothy Caldwell stood for. After he died in 1891, his private journals were found. They had hundreds of pages about cases that might have involved Timothy, as well as theoretical discussions about the nature of evil and the idea that some people might be born without the ability to think morally. For decades after Timothy went missing, people kept talking about his case and how it affected criminal justice, child psychology, and mental health treatment. His ability to fool trained professionals made people question how reliable psychiatric evaluations are, and his ability to manipulate people showed how dangerous it can be to think that all kids are innocent and can be saved. After Thomas and Sarah got better, they left the Caldwell farm. Neither of them could stand to stay in the place where they had unknowingly kept a killer for almost 2 years. The county eventually got the land back and sold it to developers in the 1890s, but people in the area stayed away for decades after that. Sheriff Crawford sealed off the cave where Timothy had done his experiments soon after the boy was arrested, but those who knew how important it was never forgot about it. People in the area believed that the cave was cursed and that animals wouldn't eat grass nearby. In 1923, Dr. Harding's daughter gave his journals to the Missouri Historical Society. She thought that the scientific value of her father's observations was more important than the fact that they were disturbing. The journals are still in the Society's archives, where researchers who can show that they are genuinely interested in the growth of psychological understanding can access them. Thomas and Sarah Caldwell never talked about their experience with Timothy in public, but they both lived under fake names for the rest of their lives, apparently because they were afraid the boy would come back to finish what he had started. Sarah passed away in 1889, and Thomas passed away in 1894. Neither of them had kids of their own. Dr. Harding wrote in his last journal entry, just days before he died in 1891, about the bigger lessons that Timothy's case taught him. I have spent 24 years trying to understand what Timothy Caldwell represented, and I fear I have reached a disturbing conclusion. Timothy was not an aberration. He was a glimpse into what human beings might become when stripped of the moral and emotional constraints that we consider fundamental to our nature. If he survived to adulthood, then somewhere in America there walks a man who understands human psychology better than any trained professional, who can manipulate people with supernatural skill, and who views the rest of humanity as nothing more than subjects for experimentation. This mystery teaches us that evil can look innocent, and that our ideas about childhood and human nature may be too simple. Timothy Caldwell's case makes us think about the uncomfortable questions of moral development, and whether some people are born without the ability to feel empathy or have a conscience, which we think are basic to being human. What do you think of this tale? Do you think everything has been told? Or could there be more to Timothy Caldwell's story than what the official records say? Please leave a comment below and tell us what you think about this troubling part of American history. If you liked this story and want to read more like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell a friend who likes dark and complicated mysteries. Keep in mind that the truth is often scarier than fiction, and history has secrets that make us question what we know about people. In the next video, I'll see you.